There is a certain kind of Hollywood legend whose life shines so brightly that the world forgets to ask where the shadows came from. And then there is Ron Howard, the gentle face, the calm voice, the man the public has always believed to be untouched by the darkness of the industry that raised him. To many, he is the safest soul in American entertainment, a child star who never fell, a filmmaker who never lost control, a steady hand in a city built on chaos. But that picture is only half of the truth. Behind the warm smile that millions recognize lies a childhood shaped by fear, by pressure, by things no child should have seen. He grew up under the glare of studio lights, surrounded by adults who used language and behavior he did not understand, trapped inside a world too demanding for someone still learning how to read. While the audience adored him, real life pressed against him with a force that left bruises on his spirit long before he knew what bruises were. He was famous before he knew what fame meant, and he paid for it every time he walked into a school hallway where jealous boys waited to corner him, push him, test him. He was called names. He was challenged to fights. He was targeted simply because he appeared on television. And in those moments, he learned that success has a price, even at 8 years old. Years later, even when the world celebrated him as Richie Cunningham in Happy Days, another wound formed. Within his own show, he watched the spotlight shift away from him and toward a character he admired but could not outrun. Audiences screamed for Fonzie. Networks wanted to rename the series after him, and Ron Howard, the original heart of the show, felt himself disappear inside the very success he helped create. He never complained. He never lashed out. But inside, something cracked, and that silent fracture would follow him into adulthood, shaping every choice he made as he walked toward a destiny no one expected. Today we know Ron Howard as the Oscar-winning filmmaker, the storyteller behind Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and countless classics. But the journey that built him was not clean. It was not easy. And it was not without controversy. What happened to the quiet boy from Oklahoma is a story of survival, of talent, of pain, and of storms he never asked for. And all of it begins in a place far more complicated than the world ever knew. Ron Howard did not ease his way into show business. He was pushed into it before he could form full sentences. While other children were learning to tie their shoes, he was learning to hit his marks, smile on cue, and repeat lines written by adults who barely remembered what childhood felt like. Born into a family of working actors, Ron stepped onto a film set almost before he learned to walk. It should have been magical, but the truth was much more complicated. The studios were not designed for innocence. They were filled with the harsh vocabulary of grown men, the sharp jokes of comedians, the whispers of producers, and the unpredictable tempers of crew members who were fighting deadlines, exhaustion, and their own frustrations. Ron remembers hearing words he did not understand, but somehow knew were not meant for children. He saw behavior he could not name, gestures he could not explain, and a world that expected him to grow up in fast motion. On The Andy Griffith Show, audiences saw a sweet little boy with bright eyes and perfect timing. But off-camera, the environment around him was crowded with adult language, adult tension, and adult problems. He was loved by the cast, protected as much as possible. Yet no amount of kindness could erase the simple truth. Ron was being forced to live a double life. A life where he had to act older than he was, speak more carefully than he knew how, and remain professional even when he was just a child who wanted to run outside and scrape his knees like other boys. And through all of this, there was an invisible weight pressing on him. The weight of expectation. The weight of being the gifted child. The weight of knowing that millions of people were watching him grow up, judging him, praising him, or criticizing him for things he barely understood. These early years shaped him, polished him, and toughened him in ways no one could see. But they also carved cracks in his heart that would only widen with time. Because, as hard as the studio life was, something much harsher was waiting outside, far from the cameras, far from the scripts, and far from the adults who tried to protect him. The world saw Ron Howard as the luckiest boy in America. Every week, millions watched him on television. They adored his smile, his gentle innocence, his near-perfect delivery. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the school bell rang, a very different reality waited for him. Fame for Ron was never a shield. It was a target. At school, he was not the charming boy from the Andy Griffith Show. He was the kid everyone wanted to test. Some boys saw him as competition, others saw him as a symbol of something they would never have, and some, driven by jealousy or insecurity, simply wanted to see if the little boy on television would cry if they hit him hard enough. Ron later described himself as a magnet for bullies. They followed him, cornered him, pushed him. They made snide comments, mocked his voice, mocked his fame, and in the worst moments, challenged him to fights just to see if they could beat up the kid from TV. No matter how polite Ron tried to be, no matter how humble he behaved, his very existence provoked resentment. He learned quickly that fame works differently in a schoolyard. It does not earn respect. It often destroys it. Around adults, he was praised. Around children, he was isolated. He would walk through the hallways and feel eyes burning into him, searching for any sign of weakness. Every time a classmate whispered his name, he braced himself. Every time someone stepped in front of him, he prepared for another shove. These experiences left marks deeper than bruises. They shaped a quiet fear inside him. A fear that being known meant being unprotected. A fear that success only invited harm. But they also built something else: resilience. The kind of resilience that grows not from triumph, but from survival. And although Ron rarely complained, those years taught him a lesson. He would carry for life the cost of being seen. A cost that would rise even higher when he stepped into the role that would change everything, and nearly break him in ways the world never knew. By the time Ron Howard stepped into the role of Richie Cunningham on Happy Days, he believed the storms of childhood were finally behind him. He was older, more confident, and ready to build a future far away from the schoolyard cruelty he had endured. For the first time, it felt like the world was giving him a clear, open path. Richie was the lead. Richie was the heart of the show. Richie was in every way the character the entire series had been built around. But Hollywood has a strange sense of humor. And sometimes, the moment you think you are standing in the spotlight is the moment it moves. At first, Ron barely noticed it. A laugh here, a bigger cheer there. Henry Winkler's character Fonzie walked onto the set in a leather jacket and a spark of charm, and the audience lit up. Week after week, month after month, the applause grew louder. The fan mail grew heavier. The energy shifted in a way that felt almost supernatural. Fonzie was not written to be the star. Yet, he became the star. And Ron, the original center of the show, watched as the gravitational pull of Hollywood tilted away from him. The ratings soared, but beneath the surface, something inside him tightened. He was proud of Henry Winkler. He admired him. But admiration does not erase the sting of being pushed aside in your own kingdom. Then came the moment that quietly shattered him. The network considered renaming the entire series. Not Happy Days, but Fonzie's Happy Days. Ron never screamed. He never demanded attention. He never fought for credit. But inside the boy who once feared being invisible felt the old wound open again. Even the success he earned could be taken from him. Even the show built around his character could forget him. And so, with a calmness that hid the storm inside, Ron made a choice that would change his life forever. He decided to leave the comfort of acting and chase something no one believed he could do. He decided to become a director, but the path ahead would not be gentle. Because The moment he stepped behind the camera, Ron Howard walked into some of the toughest battles of his entire career. Ron Howard did not enter, directing with the confidence of a man who believed he was destined for greatness. He entered it with the quiet determination of someone who had spent his entire life proving that he was more than what the world expected him to be. Many people saw him only as Richie Cunningham, the friendly face from television, the wholesome boy next door. Hollywood can be cruel to actors who try to reinvent themselves, and no one believed a former child star could become a serious filmmaker. But Ron had something far stronger than approval. He had purpose. His first directing projects did not start on glamorous sets or with massive budgets. They were small, scrappy, held together by grit and a stubborn refusal to give up. He learned how to command a crew, how to shape a scene, how to listen, how to trust his instincts. Every day behind the camera felt like stepping into a new universe, one filled with challenges, but also the freedom he had been craving since childhood. Then, slowly, something extraordinary happened. The films grew bigger, the stories grew deeper, and Hollywood for the first time began to see Ron not as the boy he once was, but as the storyteller he was becoming. Splash charmed audiences. Cocoon touched them. Parenthood revealed his intuition for human emotion. But it was Apollo 13 that truly changed everything. Suddenly, the industry that once doubted him now stood in respect as he rebuilt one of America's most dramatic missions with breathtaking clarity. And then came the moment that sealed his place in cinematic history. A Beautiful Mind. The night Ron Howard walked onto the Oscar stage and accepted the Academy Award for Best Director, he did not roar with pride. He stood there humbly, an entire lifetime of wounds, doubts, and struggles collected behind his steady eyes. The world cheered for him, but only he understood the long, painful journey that had carried him to that stage. Yet, even at the height of his triumph, trouble was already forming beyond the horizon. A controversy that would strike with a force he never expected. Success had finally wrapped itself around Ron Howard like a warm blanket. After decades of battling doubt, he had become one of the most respected filmmakers in Hollywood. His name carried a quiet authority, the kind built through patience, kindness, and craftsmanship. But sometimes, even the gentlest souls find themselves standing in the center of a storm they never meant to create. That moment arrived in 2010 during the release of The Dilemma. The trailer included a line spoken by Vince Vaughn's character, "Electric cars are gay," a sentence meant to be a joke, tossed casually into a comedy scene. But the world had changed. The culture had shifted. And the word gay was no longer something anyone could toss around without consequence. Within hours, the backlash ignited. GLAAD condemned the trailer. Anderson Cooper addressed it on national television. Social media lit up in outrage. People demanded the line be removed entirely. Universal reacted immediately. The studio pulled the line from the trailer and apologized. But the spotlight then turned to Ron Howard. Everyone wanted to know how the filmmaker, known for his gentle nature, his empathy, his moral clarity, could have allowed such a joke to stand. And Ron made a decision that shocked even his supporters. He kept the line in the final film. It was not an act of rebellion or insensitivity. It was to him a defense of creative context. He believed comedy should reflect flawed characters, messy dialogue, and real human imperfection. He did not want to edit a film because of external pressure. He did not want artists to fear honesty, even when honesty was uncomfortable. But public opinion is not shaped by nuance. For the first time in his long career, Ron Howard found himself painted as careless, tone-deaf, or worse, indifferent to the LGBTQ community. It hurt him deeply, not because he feared criticism, but because he had always tried to live with kindness. Now, he was being portrayed as something entirely different. He apologized to no one. He attacked no one. He simply endured. Yet, while the controversy eventually faded, it opened a crack in the image he had spent decades building. And through that crack, another far heavier storm was preparing to break. If the dilemma shook Ron Howard's public image, then the next controversy hit much deeper. Like a stone dropped into the calmest part of his spirit. It did not begin with a joke. It began with a promise. And when that promise was questioned, it placed Ron in the center of a storm tied to human suffering, survival, and the fragile responsibility of telling someone else's story. The film was The Good Lie, a drama about the lost boys of Sudan, a group of refugees who escaped civil war, famine, and death to seek a life beyond the horrors of their past. It was a story filled with courage and heartbreak, and Ron, through Imagine Entertainment, helped bring it to life. He wanted to honor their resilience. He wanted to amplify voices that the world rarely heard. But in 2015, the narrative twisted. A foundation representing 54 Sudanese refugees filed a lawsuit claiming that the filmmakers, including Imagine Entertainment, had used their life stories without fulfilling the compensation and agreements originally discussed. They accused the production of breaking trust. They accused the filmmakers of benefiting from their trauma. They accused Ron's company of failing to protect the very people the film was meant to uplift. For Ron Howard, a man who had built an entire career on integrity, the accusations landed with the force of a silent earthquake. He was not the writer. He was not the director. But his name, his good name, was now attached to a lawsuit about real human suffering. Headlines spread quickly. Some people questioned whether Hollywood had taken advantage of refugees' pain for profit. Others wondered if the entire project had been built on broken promises. Ron did not raise his voice. He did not fight through the press. He let the facts speak where he could not. The case dragged on for months, carving tension into every headline. In the end, the lawsuit did not end in fury or courtroom spectacle. It ended quietly through settlement, away from camera flashes and microphones. No judgment, no public triumph. Only a reminder of how delicate a responsibility it is to tell someone else's truth. And although the world eventually moved on, the incident left a mark. Not a scandal of betrayal, but a scar of caution. A reminder that even the most honorable intentions can fracture under the weight of real human stories. Yet this would not be the last time Ron felt the sting of criticism. Because as the years moved forward, a new era began. An era ruled by social media, political polarization, and relentless opinions. And in that era, another storm waited for him. By the time Hillbilly Elegy arrived in 2020, Ron Howard had already lived through more storms than the public ever realized. He had survived childhood, fame, schoolyard, cruelty, creative battles, and moral controversies. But nothing prepared him for what came next. Because this time, the world was not watching through the gentle lens of television or newspapers. This time, the world was watching through the unfiltered rage of the internet. Hillbilly Elegy was meant to be a story about family addiction, trauma, and survival. It was based on the memoir of J.D. Vance, a man who grew up torn between chaos and hope. Ron approached the film with seriousness and emotional care, hoping to explore the struggles of forgotten communities in America. But the timing could not have been more volatile. The United States was deeply divided. Politics had become a battlefield. And when J.D. Vance later stepped into the political arena, every scene of the film suddenly carried a new, unintended meaning. Critics tore the movie apart. Many dismissed it as overly sentimental. Others accused it of romanticizing suffering. And some, fueled by political frustration, attacked it as propaganda. Then came the memes, the jokes, the mockery. People on social media wrote phrases like, "Ron Howard should be in jail," not out of real anger, but out of a modern, almost performative cruelty. It spread like wildfire. The internet turned the film into a punchline. And Ron Howard, the kindest man in Hollywood, became the target of a backlash he never sought. He did not defend himself. He did not respond. He did not explain. He simply absorbed the blow with the quiet grace that had shaped his entire life. Because Ron understood something the internet did not. Art is never born in a vacuum. It carries the weight of timing, perception, and the emotions of the world around it. And sometimes, even when the heart behind a film is pure, the reaction can still turn brutal. Yet from this storm, Ron did not retreat. He did not crumble. Instead, he stepped into a new chapter. A chapter defined not by criticism, but by the people who had been his shelter and his compass from the very beginning. Long before the awards, the headlines, and the storms, Ron Howard built something that Hollywood rarely gives its children: a life anchored in love. In an industry famous for broken marriages and fragile relationships, he created the opposite. He found stability. He found a partner. And he held on to her for nearly 50 years. Cheryl Howard was with him long before the Oscar lights, long before the powerful studios, long before the controversies. She knew him when he was simply Ron, a young man, searching for direction, quietly carrying the wounds of his childhood. Their marriage began in 1975, and instead of being torn apart by fame, they grew stronger through it. Together they raised 4 children, including Bryce Dallas Howard, who now follows her father into filmmaking with the same gentle strength he carries. But the most striking thing about Ron is not his career. It is the calmness with which he moves through chaos. Directors are often loud. They shout. They demand. They dominate. Ron does not. He listens. He collaborates. He trusts. People who work with him describe him as steady, patient, almost impossibly kind. A man who can guide thousands of people through the creation of a massive film while still remembering the name of a grip, a makeup artist, or a young assistant who just arrived on set. In a city built on ego, he has almost none. In a profession built on pressure, he radiates peace. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The little boy who grew up surrounded by adult chaos became the adult who brings calm to others. The teenager who was bullied for being on television became the man who directs films watched around the world. The actor who once feared being overshadowed became the filmmaker whose work illuminates the lives of others. The man accused, judged, and criticized still chooses compassion over bitterness. Ron Howard's story is not the story of a Hollywood survivor. It is the story of a man who refused to let the darkness around him define the light within him. He grew up too fast. He was hurt too early. He was criticized when he least deserved it. And yet, through every wound, he rebuilt himself with dignity, creativity, and grace. Because greatness is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles softly. Sometimes it looks like Ron Howard, a man who walked through fires that no one saw and still chose to build a life filled with warmth, humility, and quiet courage.